shot up the transformers at a power station in San Jose a few years back. And essentially, that station was offline for at least a year. One of the reasons for that is that it takes a fair amount of time for our transformers to come from China. We don't make our own transformers anymore. That's because it's too polluting, right? You have to use PCBs, whatever the chemical is to make a transformer, and we don't do that. The Environmental Protection Agency said no, 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 no. So imagine a scenario where we have 21 degrees outside, not unusual for February. You know, we have, you guys, how many people here have a wood stove? Just out of curiosity. A lot of you. The wood stove is your salvation in this situation, but let's assume you do not. You do not have a wood stove. Your furnace cannot operate without electricity to turn the fan. If it doesn't turn the fan, you don't stay warm. So we've got to come up with alternative methods. How do you stay warm in these conditions without electricity? And I want to just touch a little bit about what effects would happen if power were disrupted in a regional area. Your hospitals have backup generators, and they'd be running the power for a while until they run out of diesel. They have maybe a 2-week supply, but if power's out for 6 or 8 weeks, they won't be able to stay functional. And what happens at that point is that the hospital goes dark. You can't go there for medical aid. Plus, it will disrupt transportation, so the trucks that deliver the medical supplies won't be able to get in. Without trucks delivering medical supplies, the hospitals have maybe a 2-day supply of drugs and specialty items that they use. So the hospitals will be, healthcare will be dramatically affected. You will see no gas stations operational. Why? Because the power to pump the gas won't be there. You won't, so you'll have the gas you have in your car, and once it's gone, you know, you're done. Stores can't operate because they all use electronic inventory, and they have usually at best a 2-day supply of inventory, which means that, and you know, all their registers and everything are electronic. Without electricity, grocery stores will probably sell out quick or be looted. As I said, transportation will shut down. It will be very hard to get trucks without fuel. It's possible trucks could come in from far outside of the disrupted zone, but count on the fact that not going to be a lot of transportation. Restaurants will be closed. You won't be able to go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac. I know that will be very hard on some of us, but such as it is. Without a furnace operating, your house is cold. And that's what we want to talk about tonight, is how to keep your house warm when you don't have electricity. It is astonishing, and as if you go without power for very long, it is astonishing how much we depend on electricity. How much of what we do is driven by power. Now, some wise people have solar backup, and they can keep their house operational by using solar panels and batteries. That's great. I think you know, more power to them. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right. So, how does the body lose heat? We're going to talk about how to stay warm by studying how it gets cold. It gets cold through 5 different ways. And this is pretty universal. Conduction. Do me a favor, would you just sit on the floor for a second? You sit on the floor for more than a minute, your butt gets cold, right? You're in a struggle here. It's the law of thermodynamics that says we're headed towards equilibrium. Hot things get cold, cold things get hot. Okay. Can you feel it though? Yeah.
We can feel
So the concept of conduction is that if you're not insulated, if you don't have any insulation between you and the source of the cold, ground in this case, you're going to get cold. You're going to lose heat. It's an energy exchange, and I guarantee you will lose. Your butt will get colder and colder and colder. And I learned this as a Boy Scout years ago when I went camping without a pad. That was my first trip. And I slept on frozen ground. And the ground, even with a sleeping bag, the ground conducted the heat away from me, and I sat and shivered all night long. It's actually kind of a funny story. I was above the fire on the hill, and I put a tarp down and got in my sleeping bag thinking that I was going to stay warm, and I didn't. And the tarp was white visqueen plastic, and I slowly slid down into the fire and burned the bottom off my sleeping bag. My first camping experience was a disaster. So, conduction, losing heat through contact with a larger surface. The law of thermodynamics. We also lose it by convection, which means wind blowing over your skin. Any kind of moving air. So if you're cold and you put a fan on, you get cold. That's just inevitable. Convection. Respiration. I breathe in cold air. I breathe out warm, moist air. Two things are happening. I'm exchanging energy. In other words, I'm bringing the air in, I warm the air, I exhale, it comes out. It comes out moist and warm. The energy exchange is not positive for me. I lose heat and I lose moisture. You know, most people don't think that they need water in a winter survival situation, and it's really important because when you see that breath going out, when you can see your breath, that's an indication you're respirating moisture out of your lungs. So respiration is really important. You got to have warm air to breathe in order to get warm air out without losing the energy exchange. That's respiration. Radiation. Your body is constantly radiating heat through the capillaries close to the skin. I'll show you some pictures in a few minutes of that. We use thermal imagers to detect that kind of thing, and it's astonishing how bare skin radiates heat. You put on a coat, a sweater, a jacket, something with insulation, it retains that heat, obviously. But radiation is a huge way to lose heat, especially through your head and your face. I've heard disputed numbers saying, 40% of your body heat's lost through your head to 80%. I don't think it's 80%. But if you're insulated everywhere else except your head, you're going to lose a lot of heat through your head. So when it's cold out, I always wear a stocking cap. That's just a common sense thing. All right. Radiation. I just did radiation. Evaporation. That's when I sweat, I get damp, moist, and then convection occurs. Or just the process of evaporation. It's really accelerated if you get wet and have a windy day. That's what wind chill is. Wind chill drives the temperature way down. But many years ago, this is one of those morality tales, a lot of my experience comes from, I remember John Kennedy being asked, how do you make good decisions? And he says, I've made a lot of bad ones, essentially paraphrasing. He says, I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I made good decisions now because I've learned from experience to not do that. The old saying that knowledge is knowing it hurts and wisdom is not doing it again. Well, I decided for some reason, I look back on some of the stupid stuff I've done, and it's really amazing I'm alive. I decided to go canoeing by myself on the Bass River in New Jersey in February. Now, there was a lot of ice on the river, but I figured I could do just fine. But I prepared. I did a couple of things. I wore fleece, polar fleece uppers and lowers, and wool socks and a wool jacket. Now, and I had a poncho with me, and I had a fire starting kit, which I don't ever go out without. So what happened is I'm paddling down, and the water there's ice everywhere, and the water, I couldn't see its stump. And I ran into the stump, it turned my boat sideways and flipped me into the water. Now the water was probably 38 degrees. It was pretty close to freezing. Whew. To say that's invigorating is a slight understatement. I climbed my behind out of the water, dragged the canoe up on to the land, and I took my fleece off. Now this is why I love fleece as an outdoor wear. I took both of them, I stripped down to my underwear, and I swung that fleece around my head, and about 80% of the water flew out of it. So I put it back on, so now I'm only 20% as wet as I was before. And I built a very small fire, and I sat with the fire between my knees. I mean, it's a small fire, and I wrapped my poncho around me and sealed it off. It's called a scout fire. We teach it in our classes. And that heat fills the cavity of the poncho, superheats my core. Now I had to undo my jacket so that it got to because the insulation had to work that way too. I had to let the heat in. And my femoral arteries, the fire was really close to my femorals. And I was sitting there and my feet were like blocks of ice. And as soon as I wrapped up in that fire, my feet just went, huh, I got circulation and it's warm. So the fleece was the fabric that saved my life. I mean, honestly, if I'd been wearing jeans and a t-shirt, I doubt I would have made it. It was very cold. It was 25 degrees. The water temperature was, I think, about 35. So, you do stupid things, you pay stupid prices. I guess I should say I learned from it. What I learned is don't canoe in February. So if I lose, and in this situation, there was a little breeze blowing, right? I'm wearing wet clothes, and the breeze is giving me wind chill. But by wrapping up in the poncho, I cut off the wind. I sealed it so that the fire's heat would warm my body core and my femoral arteries. And about 10 minutes later, I just had a stack of wood. I just kept feeding little sticks onto that fire. The fire was never any bigger than really about the size of my fist. Very small fire, just constantly feeding it. Within 10 minutes, I was bone dry, both sides. I was warm as could be. My wool jacket was wet, and it wasn't going to dry out, but I finished the trip just wearing my fleece jackets. I have fleece underwear and fleece jacket. I made it. It was okay. I can tell you, though, that evaporation, wind blowing over wet material, not good. One of the I'm sure you've heard this, but one of the terms we use for summer clothing is cotton for summer, because it does just that. It evaporates and cools you. So if you go on a safari, you're going to see a guy wearing a cotton shirt like this one, and he's going to be all sweaty, and that's how he stays cool. But you don't want that in the winter. The advantage of a fleece or something like that is that it wicks the moisture away from your skin. And so it's really important to understand these principles of how you get cold. What happens to rob your body of heat? Because we have to fix that. We have to fix it. All right, so we mitigate heat loss by insulating. That means you have to trap air. It's also helpful if you warm the air. So some external source of heat. If you have nothing, then you have to use your body heat to warm you. And by making sure you don't sweat. Those are two pictures of thermal images. The guy on the right has no shirt on in freezing temperature. He's going to get cold very quickly. Look how much heat is radiating out of his body. What happens? What does your body do to generate heat? Burns calories. So one of the things you have to think about is how to keep a positive calorie flow in cold weather. You got to bring in more than you burn. The guy it's the same guy. The guy on the right, you can see he's wearing an insulated coat. He's leaking heat through his hands and through his face. He's a lot better off with a coat on, right? So you have to insulate. Insulation works by trapping air and keeping it from convecting. So anything that traps the air close to your body and keeps the wind from blowing off of it is going to work for you. It's going to keep you much, much warmer. When I was working back east at the survival school, we had a contest that we used to do. And this will explain what I'm talking about. And the contest was to see how long we could sit in the river. And we always waited till November, December, January. And it would be to go sit somewhere up to your neck. Now, I discovered something that the other instructors didn't know. And that is, I found a spot there that was kind of an eddy, and the current didn't move the water at all. Now, they were sitting out in the current. And what happened is, as I sat there, my body heated a little pocket of water around me that insulated me. And I was able to sit, my longest one was 55 minutes, sitting in 40-degree water. I know there's a guy out there named Wim Hof. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. Wim Hof teaches you how to do that. It's pretty cool. He can get in an ice bath, literally frozen water, and stay for a long time. He teaches body control. So we were practicing body control. The other instructors, they'd be out there in the current, and it would be like wind blowing over wet skin all the time. They couldn't make it more than 5 or 10 minutes. And they'd sit there and just curse me for being a polar bear. They said, well, you got fat, you got insulation. I got a secret. By getting out of the wind, you have a chance to stay warm. All right, so let's talk about houses. How do you heat your house with no electricity? Well, the answer obviously is a wood stove. My wood stove will heat my whole house. I have to keep it burning, I have to keep it hot, and I go through a lot of wood, but you know, it will heat the whole house. It'll keep the house from freezing. Now, one of the things we teach in survival that I really want to make a point of is that there's a difference between being miserable and being in danger. Cold temperatures may make you miserable, but it takes a lot to kill you. You have to be exposed for a long period of time to kill you. So don't confuse misery for death. Just because you're miserable. I remember I was a scoutmaster for 25 years. I took the troop up, and we were building snow shelters and sleeping in them. And one of the kids, just, you know, I made a very specific list. You have to bring the following. He didn't bring any wool socks. He had cotton socks, gym socks. Well, within about 30 minutes, his feet were cold. And finally, he just sat down on the ground and started crying. And I remember walking over to him and saying, you know, you have two choices. You can sit here on the ground and cry until you die, or you can get off your butt and start working at making your situation better. But my feet are cold. I said, maybe somebody has some wool socks they can loan you. Giving up is not an option. I'm not taking you home in a body bag, so get off your butt and get to work. He did. An hour later, he was sliding down the hill in a sled. He was fine. So he just made the decision that, yeah, I'm going to get through this. So that's an important aspect of survival. All right, so your house has a wood stove? Great. You don't have to worry about it. As long as you have wood. Got to have a lot of wood. I'm amazed at how hungry my stove is. I've gone through a lot of wood. All right, so what do you do without a wood stove? Well, let's start by looking at the house. The house has a lot of space, and it is difficult to maintain heat throughout your entire home. So you're going to heat a smaller area. Pick an area, probably your great room and kitchen. And you're going to seal it off from the rest of the house. It's pretty simple to do that. You'll move mattresses in. That's the next slide. Move mattresses in to sleep on, hang blankets over doors. Whatever you can do to shrink the amount of space you have to heat. One of my favorite tricks is to take bubble wrap and tape it over the windows. I have a laser thermometer, and it allows me to get a reading on any surface. So that door temperature on the door over there is 55 degrees. Temperature here is 66. If I turn this on, temperature is 1600 degrees. This is really helpful. Take a reading on a glass window, and then cover it with bubble wrap, tape it, seal it, and then take another reading. You'll be surprised. Be surprised how effective just something like bubble wrap is. Why? Because it traps air. The little capsules hold air, keep it from, if you go outside with an infrared camera and take a picture of your house, your windows are the single biggest heat loss source. They glow red while everything else is gray. So put some extra insulation on them. Super, super easy. Blankets allow you to go through the door and still keep the heat in the room, right? Bring your mattresses into the main room. Everybody sleeps. It's a big slumber party. Get sleeping bags for the kids because they think it's the greatest thing ever and they love it. Just shrink the room that you have to heat and then insulate it as well as you can. As a general rule, great rooms that are 2 stories, like warming this room, this building, would be at shore because the ceilings are 20 feet. A great room has sometimes 20-foot ceilings. That's not going to be good for it. So the smaller the space, the more complete the heat trapping will be. All right, let's talk about safety. Some things you really want to have if you're using fire in your house. I use them. I have a fire extinguisher sitting next to my wood stove. And it's marginal. I need to get a new one. They're 25 bucks a pair at Costco. I have fire extinguishers. I have one fire extinguisher next to my bed. Why? Because if I hear a smoke detector going off, I don't want to run into another room to get a fire extinguisher. I pick it up and run out with it. It's also a pretty good weapon. I have a fire extinguisher next to my wood stove. I have one in the kitchen. I have one in the shop. I have 2 in my Jeep. A friend of mine had a fire in his Jeep here in town, in Diamond Valley. And he emptied his fire extinguisher on it and didn't put the fire out. And he lost his Jeep. It turned into complete lump of metal. So I always carry at least 2 fire extinguishers in my Jeep, 1 in my car. I don't care if the car burns up. And don't mess with my Jeep. All right, so a CO detector, not a CO2 detector, a carbon monoxide detector is very, very important. Most houses, you're required to have one to pass code anyway. To get a certificate of occupancy, you got to put a CO in. I would recommend having this is a little handheld unit that allows you to monitor it in different rooms and see how it works. These are welder's gloves. These are really useful for, I keep these by the fireplace, and if a log isn't situated right, I put my hand in and move the log where I want it. I don't mess with pokers or anything like that because this gives me dexterity. So welder's gloves are really great. For some of the things we're going to do tonight, really, really want to have welder's gloves. They're not very expensive. You can get them at Ace. But those 3 things are what I consider critical safety gear. All right, you got a gas stove? Anybody have a gas stove or a propane? Well, you got 4 burners. Seal off your kitchen and your living or in your family room and turn on the 4 burners. Yeah, you're going to use a lot of gas, but it'll keep things from freezing up. Now, we'll talk about that in a minute. Electric stoves, not so much. You don't want to do that with an electric stove. Because why? There's no electricity. And you probably won't be able to get your oven to work without electricity, but if you have one that you can light manually with a long match, then the oven's good too.
So how about a barbecuer? Bring it in the house?
If it's propane, you're okay. Not charcoal.
And you're on the carbon monoxide.
Yeah, and make sure you have the carbon. I'm going to go through a little bit about that, about what gases work for what. All right, so anybody got a kerosene heater? Yeah, I have, in New Jersey, you couldn't carry anything that ever had fuel in it when you moved. If you hired a van to move you, you couldn't carry it. People would put kerosene heaters out on with the garbage, and I'd pick them up. I had, I think, 5 of them at one time, which is great when I'm doing a class and I have a big tent set up and I need to keep it warm. I'm not really crazy about kerosene heaters because the gas from them is so strong. You get a lot of soot, you get a very strong smell. My wife can't stand to have a kerosene heater on in the house. I used to get really bad headaches, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But I used to get really bad headaches from kerosene heaters. So I only have one. I only brought one out with me. I picked the best one and brought it out. And I guess I could use it in a dire emergency, but most of the time it's just not cold enough here that I have to worry about that. You can get high-grade kerosene, and you can get paraffin that will work, and they will burn much cleaner, but they're not cheap. I think it's either a gallon. I think a gallon of high-grade kerosene is $15. Yeah, that's just not right. I mean, you could do it if you have money's no object, but you got to take it outside to fuel it up too, by the way. You don't want to fuel it up in the room. You can get cleaner fuels. Now, what most people may not realize is that diesel fuel oil, JP5, which is jet fuel, and kerosene are all the same chemical compound. They're the same chemical. The difference is how refined they are. Kerosene is not particularly refined. It creates a lot of soot and carbon monoxide. But one of the alternatives is paraffin lamp oil. That burns in a kerosene heater quite well. Also burns in kerosene lanterns quite well. I didn't put anything in here about kerosene lanterns, and I probably should have, but I have a propane lantern. Both kerosene lanterns and propane lanterns generate heat. And if they're trimmed and kept operational in the right way, then they don't produce a ton of carbon monoxide. Kerosene is the worst offender in terms of carbon monoxide. And so I prefer to use it only in a pretty well ventilated area. That's just, they're clean burning, but I would say they're only cleaner burning. Propane heaters. This is a propane heater. This guy right here. It sits on a 5-gallon propane bottle. Puts out a ton of heat. I'm not going to fire it up, but
How long that thing would burn?
it burns a long time. It has a setting, so you can set it on low, medium, or high. And once you get the room warmed up, you can set it to low, and it'll burn a long time. You got to have multiple canisters, however. You're not going to be able to refill them. So what you got's what you get.
Does it burn really clean?
Yeah, it burns very clean. If it's adjusted right, it burns really clean. Propane and butane are the two cleanest fuels. This is a butane stove. It runs on little cartridges that cost $2 each. I cooked for a week 2 to 3 meals a day on a single canister. It's a really good economical model. And both propane and butane have the lowest carbon dioxide. Next up is white gas, next up is kerosene. Kerosene is high carbon monoxide. That's a dioxide. In the middle is white gas, the old pump up Coleman stove. I think I've got a picture of one here. So I prefer propane over anything. There are a number of options. The one on the far left here, this one, that was my go-to. I lived in a yurt for about 5 years, half time. I spent half my life in a yurt, the other half at home with my wife. And we had that in the center of the room, and it would literally drive us out. We'd have to throttle it way back. I think it's like 40,000 BTUs. I mean, it's an insane amount of BTUs. This thing is like 10,000 comparatively. There's the little Mr. Buddies. You can buy these nowadays in the middle. They're really good as like a tent heater or a small room heater. They're not terribly efficient. You can connect them to a 20-pound tank and get a lot of use out of it. And then there are the little Coleman 2-pack containers with a small heater that screws onto the top. Those are kind of the 3 grades. And if you're heating the house, that big one is absolutely fabulous. With any kind of flame, you need to have a source of fresh air coming in. People who die in tents do so because they fire up their stove or their heater and zip everything closed. You got to have air coming in. That's a very big caution with any flame, even candles. So propane is the fuel of choice as long as you have enough containers. I can probably go 2 or 3 days on a 20-pounder. So if you're going to go a month, you've got to have a few 20-pounders. I need to get mine refilled. I think I've used most of them. But I can take them down to Cal Ranch or Ace and exchange them. And they work pretty good. I mean, you get a pretty good bang for your buck. I mean, it's about 25 bucks to refill or exchange. You have to buy the canisters, another 25 bucks. You know, and for long-term situations, you can buy a 100-pound container. I have one of those, and it will heat my stove and heater for a long time. But just 20-pounders are fine. You can even use I think they're 2 pounds, the little Coleman canisters, as long as you don't mind changing them a lot. And as long as you have a lot of them. All right, so propane. Alcohol is a surprisingly effective heat source. What I have here on this table is a quart paint can, empty, with a roll of toilet paper inside of it. And then I fill it with 91% rubbing alcohol or denatured alcohol, whichever you want. This denatured alcohol is $10 a quart. This is $3 a quart. And I simply pour it in. Probably should do this outside. Follow my own advice. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but this is kind of one of those, yeah, that's what it's made of. One of those secret things here. Yeah. I'm not going to light it now because I spilled it all over the place. What I was going to do is light it and take some temperature readings, but I think I kind of messed up by doing it. Alcohol boils at like 80 degrees. It has a very low boiling point. So even if you mess up and spill it, it doesn't last long. But at the Boy Scout camp where we used to go all the time for camping trips, the Boy Scout set himself on fire using rubbing alcohol and burned 80% of his body and died. So when this evaporates away, I'll consider lighting that. This thing, you just light it and you have a flame coming up, and you can set the flame by how you put the lid on. I carry one of these in my car. This is great if you run into a snowbank and you're trapped in the car for the night. You put this down on the floor and it'll keep your car nice and toasty. You gotta crack the window. Need about an inch of air coming in. But man, that thing heats a small space like that. Let me just talk about cars for just a second. People will die in cars because they're afraid to do damage to their car. I remember a guy on Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania got trapped in his car, like buried in 6 feet of snow. I mean, he was really buried. He took his knife and cut up his upholstery, took the padding out of his upholstery, and put it inside his clothes. Wrecked his truck, but he didn't die. You gotta think that way. One of these in the trunk of your car, you fill it up like this, and then seal it, and it'll store for, as long as that lid is on there tight, it'll store for a long time. And of course, this toilet paper is absorbing the water, the alcohol, as it should. I will say this. I used to say you can run this stove for pennies, but given the shortages of toilet paper these days, it's a little more. I really want to stay warm.
Can you use vodka?
You can't. You can use high-grain alcohol, Everclear, vodka. I don't know what else would fit that bill, but you can use denatured alcohol. 71. This is 91%. It burns hotter than the 70% or 71%. That's the only difference. But I can tell you, this will burn for, I think I did a burn test on it with partial burn like that, covered up. It's in the picture there. You can see the fire. It burned for, my recollection is 7.5 hours. Yeah, I mean, if you're in a car, and then you just keep filling it with more alcohol. You have to make sure the flame's out when you fill it.
I was gonna ask that.
Don't try and pour alcohol onto a hot flame. It's like gasoline in that respect. Very flammable.
Are you filling the can or are you just soaking the toilet paper?
I'm filling the can to the top and soaking the toilet paper in the process. I'll let you look at it here. Once this evaporates a little, we'll let it up. Seriously, the alcohol's crazy. It's like gasoline in that as it evaporates, it stays close to the ground and spreads out. So you can say, okay, the spill's over here, I'm gonna light over here, and go. That's stupid experiences.
The window cracked open, but it's not really that toxic.
Alcohol is pretty safe. I mean, no flame anywhere in a closed space. I mean, you have to have some ventilation if you have flame. I don't care what kind of flame it is. Right? You can have I mean, that's just common sense.
What about a gas fireplace?
The big issue with the gas fireplace is that the striker or the igniter usually is a piezo switch that sparks like this thing or like this thing. So when this is locked down, that's locked in, you can hear that pink. That's a piezo strip. If your gas logs have that, you should be able to burn it. Now, gas is probably the one thing.
That's fire extinguisher.
Yeah, that's what I have the fire extinguisher for.
Our first and last meeting.
Just didn't have it seated properly. This is almost evaporated. So, this stove, by the way, is about $20 down at the hardware store. It's a really good, easy to set up. If you don't have a gas stove, then it's a good alternative for cooking when there's no power. A gas log, they say that of all the utilities, because of the pressure in the line, gas will be around the longest if the grid goes down. You should have gas pressure for a very long time. What does that mean? That means that, well, my house about 10, 12 years ago, they took out everything gas and put in electric. But I still have a standpipe out there. Should the need come up, I'm planning on tapping it and at least connecting it to some of my appliances. But gas company wouldn't like that. By the time I get to that point, the gas company won't care. All right, so alcohol. This is a really good way to carry a stove to keep you warm. It's quite effective, which I hope to show you. All right, let's go on. And so, this in a small bathroom would work really good. Keep the bathroom pipes from freezing. It would work in a main room if it's well insulated. Now, one of my new, and I don't claim to be the know-all of all of this stuff. I don't know everything about how to stay warm, but this is one that I do know works, and that is to make a pile of bricks outside, like a chimney, and then build a fire in the center. and let that fire burn, keep feeding it for a couple of hours, 3-4 hours, until those bricks are really hot. Bricks are great for retaining heat. And then you get a shovel and your welder's gloves and load them up and bring them in, put them on a fireproof surface. Don't put them on your carpet. Put them on a fireproof surface, and they don't have to be in any configuration. You can just stack them up any way you want. And if you have enough bricks, then you go back outside and light up another pile and just keep rotating. These bricks will put off a lot of heat. And I guess you could regulate them by taking bricks outside or something, you know, if it gets too hot. Generally probably won't, but anything with thermal mass. A lot of wood stoves have soapstone plates on the outside that get heated up and then hold the heat all night. Soapstone's another example of something like a brick. You could definitely do soapstone if you have access to it. I mean, I don't know how expensive it is. We used to do stuff with it all the time, but we had a quarry in our area there that we could go quarry some. But this one I think is pretty ingenious. I think this could work in a small space. This could be all you need. But you got to feed the fireplace. You know, the chimney outside. That if you leave a little gap in the bottom between the bottom two of the bricks on the bottom for air to come in, that'll burn really hot. It'll be like a rocket stove. I should have brought a rocket stove to show you. That most of the time, that kind of a stove combusting charcoal or wood is very likely to create carbon monoxide. All right. Some of you have heard of this. I'm kind of a skeptic, but I brought some with me to see if it would work. It's called the flower pot heater, and essentially what you do is you put some bricks down, and then you put some tea candles down. 2 or 3 tea candles per lantern. I say 3 per pot. Now, I've always been skeptical of this, but I thought about it. I thought, well, you got 3 flames, 6 flames here, and they're going up and creating thermal mass, heating thermal mass in the form of the flower pots. Flower pots have to have a hole in the bottom to vent air through or keep the lights out. Some people say, oh, this is great. I say the laws of physics say you'll never get more heat out of this than the 6 candles. That's it. But 6 candles could be significant. I have here this 3-wick candle, and I can tell you that thing puts out a fair amount of heat. Any open flame is going to be hot. And wax burns clean. So the wax on a candle generally heats up really well without creating a lot of carbon monoxide. There's a whole process for how that works, and it's way too complex, but the longer the carbon chain, the more carbon monoxide it contains. So propane has a small chain, white gas a medium chain, and kerosene a really long chain, which just means it's naturally going to be deadly. Now, what happens with carbon monoxide is that your bloodstream loves carbon monoxide. It loves to absorb it, the hemoglobin does. But it interrupts the blood exchange, the oxygen exchange in your blood. It's much easier for the body to absorb carbon monoxide than it is oxygen. So if you have an abundance of carbon monoxide, your bloodstream's going to get really excited about the fact that it has this carbon monoxide to bond to, and you die. think the general rule is less than 5%. And that's what you need. I don't have mine's up on the ceiling, so I don't have it accessible. But that's what you need that for. It needs to be present when you're burning. You know, if you have one in your living room, but you sealed it off and you're burning in the family room, no good. Not so good, not gonna work so well. All right, so I have a couple of oil lamps, old-fashioned chimneys and glass, and I'll use those. Here's the big caution with any flame. This propane heater is a good example. Is that you get close to it, you're gonna get burned. Kids are fascinated with fire. All right, so they see candles, they'll want to play with them. They'll see, so it's just a morality tale here. My big brother, when he was 8 years old, got out of the bathtub, put on some clean pajamas, and it was cold, so he went over to the radiant propane heater and stood with his back to it. And it set his clothes on fire. Burned 35% of his body, 3rd-degree burn. Kid spent 2 years getting skin grafts and just had, you know, it was just a disaster because he just didn't realize that, well, back in 1956 when this happened, they didn't have any standards around fireproofing children's clothes. Pajamas in particular have fire retardants and keep that from happening. Maybe because of him. You know, I mean, I'm sure there are lots of cases like it. But he suffered for getting too close to the heater. So if you have small children, you're probably going to have to use barricades to keep them from getting at it. I remember a friend of mine had a different kind of propane heater, but he had a propane heater, and he had a playpen, and he put the heater in the playpen, and the kids would get over there, and they couldn't get to the heater because he had toddlers. So something to protect the kids is going to be really important. Put it up high. You know, it's any flame. Any kids are drawn to it like a moth. Any flame whatsoever, they're going to go for. All right. How to sleep warm. We've got to go back a few 10 or 20 decades here to figure this one out. Here's a few things that I use to sleep warm. One, there's no external source of heat, hot water heater. Now you may not have hot water if it's an electric or hot water heater, so you may end up heating it on the stove. But you fill this thing with hot water and put it in your bed, you're gonna love life. I use that when I'm camping. Sometimes I'll use a hot water bottle. Sometimes I use a Nalgene bottle, fill it up with hot water, put it at the bottom of my bed. It always keeps me warmer, always. Now I always carry a water bottle in bed with me as well. And I have the hot water bottle, which is as cool as I can drink. And if it's still a little bit warm, that warms my interior. I also have a pee bottle. Because if I'm out camping in the snow, the worst thing in the world is getting out, losing all my heat, walking over in the snow with bare feet, and peeing off in the bushes. So I always carry a pee bottle in there as well. This is the one I got from my last hospital stay. It's an actual urinal. Imagine that. For years I peed in Gatorade bottles. Got some stories about that. Make sure that the difference between your pee bottle and your water bottle is substantial. That in your sleep, you don't make the mistake of grabbing the wrong bottle. Oh, man. It doesn't taste good, I gotta tell you. I was a little disappointed. Then we had a Gatorade bottle. My buddy had a Gatorade bottle in his tent. And somebody during the day when he wasn't looking, went in there and with a very small razor blade cut little notches in the bottom. So when he peed, it leaked right out all over him. And he was like mystified. He's going, am I missing? What's going on? He came down the next morning and said, so. And the great part about it is that after almost 20 years, nobody has ever confessed to having it. Great practical joke. Anyway, so pee bottle, keep you from getting out of bed. If you see that tray, that long-handled thing on the bottom, my mom had that. That was my mom's. And it was a bed warmer. And she put a couple of bricks on the wood stove and put them in that pan and then slid them under the covers. And she could move it up and down and heat the bed before she got in. I said, was it really necessary? She goes, oh, it was, if it was, she was living in Rigby, Idaho when she was a little girl, and it was 15 degrees out or 0 degrees out, and the house was not well insulated before the time of insulated houses. She says, our room would be below freezing. Yeah, it was necessary. Nothing's worse than getting into a cold bed. So that really helps you retain heat. It's surprising. The bed warmer really works. In a primitive setting, we always get a cantaloupe-sized rock and put it next to the fire, not in the fire. You don't want it superheated. You want it warmed up to build, like these bricks, to build heat. And I put that in the bottom of my sleeping bag. I usually wrap it in a towel to keep from burning anything, because they can get pretty warm. That will keep you warm all night. So, and then I said M&Ms. In this case, I didn't bring M&Ms because I couldn't find any, but I brought Swedish fish. This is one of those little secrets that most people have never heard of, but I keep a bowl of M&Ms or a bag of M&Ms or Swedish fish or something next to my bed. And if during the night I start to get cold for any reason, pop a few of those in my mouth, and the sugar fires that furnace up and warms you like crazy. Just had a student sleeping outside last week and it was 20 degrees. And he didn't have a great sleeping bag. And he said, I started to get cold, but he says, I reached over and grabbed a handful of M&Ms. I ate them. 5 minutes later, I was back asleep, totally warm. Peanut M&Ms may be even better because there's a combination of the nuts, which are complex, and the sugar, which is simple carbs. I really recommend having some candy next to your bed. Plus it's good. I mean, let's face it, that's just good stuff. All right, so let's talk a little bit about light. Number of options. A white gas lantern and a propane lantern like this, they both generate a lot of heat. So they can help heat a room. I mean, this thing gets really hot. You can cook on it if you had the means. Same with a propane version. I have a kerosene one. I just don't like again, off gas is really nasty gas. So I never use it. It's called a butterfly. But lanterns give you heat and light. But you also have just the issue about light. And this is an LED light made by Bare Bones. It's got a cord on it that I can charge my phone with. It's adjustable light, so I can use it as a bright light or dim it down a little bit. This is a small version made by Gold Zero. I love Gold Zero gear, but this thing is pretty dang bright. And no heat, no danger of fire. Just a really good lantern, man, I tell you. But you know what? Kind of the rule should be when the sun goes down, you go to bed. That was what my grandpa taught me. he never stayed up after the sun went down because he had to get up early and milk the cows. And whatever else he had to do. He had chores, as he said. So having some light at night is nice, but you don't have to have it time. One of the dangers, if you're in the same room as the flame, you're probably okay. Right? But I wouldn't put flame in another room of any kind and then go over here and go to bed. If you're there, when your bottom of your sleeping bag's on fire, like mine was, you'll know it. It's just dangerous to leave stuff out. So candles like this, I leave that burning up frequently. And it's a 3-wick candle, right? And there's 3-wick flames in there. That thing will burn forever. And 3 flames are giving you pretty good heat. If I put something to hold a standoff on it, it would, I could cook with it. So you've got to be really cautious. Now, solar systems are great. If you have a big enough one, you can turn your furnace fan. Most people don't. I have probably 400 watts of solar panels and 1 lithium-ion phosphate battery, which means I can run my computers and my cable modem, assuming I'm getting the signal, or I can keep my phone charged and hit the cell towers that way. I can stay in touch using that. I can charge up handheld radios. I'm a big fan of the Gold Zero brand, but there are many others now that are competitive. I think this is a 25 watt. I don't know if you can see that. It folds up into a little tiny space. It's designed for backpacking, actually. Maybe for backpacking, but that was their original design. I spent a lot of time with the guys at Gold Zero that designed what is now the bare bones tent, and talking about design options with them. And they wanted to pick my brain. Dangerous thing to do. And consequently, got to know them and their product line. And that's why I'm a fan. And I don't have that. This is like folding up a map. Once it's unfolded, you can't ever get it back. It's designed to hang on the back of your backpack so that while you're hiking, you're charging your phone or your electronics. I don't want to be that dependent on my electronics, but for communication systems, it's a good idea. I can keep my battery charged. I can never, with my small solar system, turn my furnace. I can run my refrigerator. I can run it for about 2 hours a day and then switch over to the freezer and run it for about 2 hours a day, and that will keep everything cold, frozen enough. I don't have to have it running all the time. Now, something else I've got that for a grid down, no electricity situation is really helpful is I have a parabolic dish. It's 4 feet across, and at the apex, there's a rack to put a pot. It heats that apex to about 750 degrees in any kind of sunlight. And so I can boil water, purify water all day long without using a single BTU of any other kind. I don't have any other gas. That thing is awesome for a really nice solar system with lots of panels, lots of batteries. That's a substantial investment, and it does really add to your self-sufficiency. So, solar is a great alternative. It's not the end all be all for everybody, but it does work. It's pretty dang effective, and I can recommend it. I know that there are a lot of breaks you can get from the government tax and so forth to put in a solar system. I don't know what they are. I've never really studied, but something to think about. Finally, stoves, single burner like this one, propane. This one's butane, not propane. So single burner butane. Propane, I have a Camp Chef 3-burner stove we use in our camp, and a 20-gallon container. With a lot of use over the course of the week, we'll go through one can, one 20-pounder. I'm a hoarder, I admit that. So I probably have 2 or 3 white gas stoves. I have 2 or 3 propane stoves. I figure somebody will need it if I don't use it. My kids are gonna, if I die and they have to go through it all, they're gonna think it's crazy. But that's the way it is. White gas, alcohol, all kinds of options for stoves. The idea is that you probably need to cook. And yeah, anyway, there's some dirt. I could get down in the weeds with that, but I don't. All right, summary. Heat a small space. Shrink the area, the living area, to a heatable alternative. If you have a bathroom on the far end of the house, then you want to put some form of heater in there to keep the pipes from freezing. What's the other trick you use to keep the pipes from freezing? Drip the water. Keep the water running. Yeah. But I probably want to do both. I want to have something in there to keep it warm. And, you know, we get down to 0 once or twice during the year here. It's not Star Valley. My daughter lived in Star Valley, where you go 3 weeks, 4 weeks at a time at 20 below, 30 below. With it never warming up. I mean, it never got above 0. It would be 40 below at night. Then you got to really worry about frozen pipes. I did a survival class for the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum, New York. Anybody ever been to Fort Drum? It is way up there by Canada. And that week, the week we did the class, it didn't get above 20 below, and it was 40 below at night. Now, what I can tell you from that experience is that you have 0 mobile dexterity, no digital dexterity. I kept my hand in these huge mittens with hand warmers in them, and they were great. I take off my hands to do something, and literally within 2 minutes, my hands were numb beyond ability to feel. So I put the mittens back on, the hand warmers, and go, wow, that was nice. My arms became flippers. I felt like a seal. That was all I could do. That's no way to live, I gotta tell you. There's gotta be a better way. All right, so I think that's pretty much it. I'm certainly open to questions and suggestions too. I just came